Scavengers is a beautiful animated short film that aired on Adult Swim's Toonami block in late 2016. Adult Swim advertised the 8-minute animation with a brief promo, which I'll feature right now.
All contact has been lost with the Vesta 1 command crew. They are cut off and all alone. Or are they?
The promo's narration is highly generic and not reflective of what Scavengers is really about, and I'd argue this is for the better, as the vague inaccuracy of the promo keeps spoilers at bay and allows one to have a unique experience when watching Scavengers for the very first time. It should go without saying that if you haven't seen Scavengers yet, you really should. The entire short is uploaded on Vimeo by one of its creators. I am going to be dissecting literally every single part of this animation, and I'd rather have people form their own opinions and feelings before listening to mine. So I urge you to pause this video, click the link I provided in the description, and I'll see you again in 8 minutes. Alright, to those who listened to my plea, welcome back. I hope you had fun with what you witnessed, and to those who've already seen Scavengers, sorry for all that preamble, let's get right into it. Scavengers is a visual experience. It contains absolutely no dialogue whatsoever, and only brief textual exposition at the very beginning to establish the setting and scenario. Scavengers presumably takes place in the near future when humanity is capable of constructing spacecrafts that are capable of reaching other hospitable planets in the galaxy. Obviously, something went horribly wrong with the attempt to settle on the planet Vesta Minor. We don't know the exact cause behind the catastrophe, but a collision or explosion of some kind must have occurred, judging by all that debris floating around in orbit. An improvised descent to the planet had to be made, but some of the pods blow up while entering the atmosphere. It's very likely some of the original crew did not make it, though we don't know the number of casualties. 2 of the crew members survived and established a settlement on the alien planet. The pods serve as their homes, their sleeping quarters, where they do laundry, etc. This was a colonization mission after all, so in a sense, colonization has continued, but with fewer people than intended, and absolutely no way to contact the rest of humanity back on Earth. Human technology does not play a primary role during this animation. Instead, alien life does. Alien life that at times superficially appears nearly technological itself. The 2 survivors have had plenty of time to adjust and adapt to the alien world and become knowledgeable about the myriad of interactions that can occur with the native flora and fauna. After the introductory sequence, there was a time skip. It has been, at the very minimum, 72 days of survival for our 2 characters. But just how much higher up on the paneling do these tallies go? I think it's possible that even years have gone by, because everything the humans do in Scavengers, all the chain reactions they instigate, the manipulation of life and death, all of it was done to achieve a brief, visceral glimpse of what these characters have left behind. But keeping with the spirit of this animated short, I'll save that discussion for the end of this video. I think it's fascinating that we don't get to see how the 2 humans figured out their seemingly ridiculous procedure. How much trial and error, and no doubt sheer luck, was needed to develop their process. We don't get to witness all the observations, all the data collection, the experimentation required to attain this level of knowledge about the alien life forms. We're instead plunged right into seeing the characters carry out a process they've already become well accustomed to. So it's fun to take a step back and let your imagination wonder, just how the hell did they learn to do that? I have to admit, at first it almost seemed far-fetched that these characters have such an extensive ability to manipulate things around them, but it helped me to remember that humans throughout history, and even earlier, have done a remarkable job at taking things from the environment and repurposing them for their own needs. There is an endless amount of examples, but for fun, I'm going to pull just a few from the manga Golden Kamui, which often details the culture of the Ainu people of Japan. Making clothes from the bark of elm trees. Making bowstring out of killer whale tendon. Making a whole bunch of stuff out of fish skin. The fact that people can learn to take an organism, a living thing, and utilize it in ways like these and countless more, it can be pretty mind-blowing if you think about it, especially since humans have done these sorts of tasks for ages before modern technology even came about. Therefore, I don't think it's that far-fetched for the humans and scavengers to learn how to manipulate nature to the extent that they do. Not to mention, these are scientists who came to colonize the planet after all. Of course they would analyze and research the life they find there. So let's get into the details. Let's chronologically break down the biological Rube Goldberg-like cascade of interactions that the humans devised. The first task is to wake this beast from its restful slumber so that it can hopefully urinate on this particular orange lump. The two humans are very careful and steady in their approach, staying in cover so that they're not spotted by the creature prematurely. An animal that thinks it's being stalked or hunted, or even if it simply feels like its territory is being intruded on, that animal is unlikely to exhibit its regular behavior. I would imagine if our characters were noticed approaching the den, the beast might flee or attack, rather than taking a post-nap whiz. The humans wake the creature with the odor emitted from a spiky ball. It's akin to using smelling salts, I presume. Notice all the broken shells of previous balls tossed towards this spot. This is clearly not the first time the humans are trying to wake this particular creature so it can go pee. They have scouted out its den for the purpose of returning to repeat the process whenever necessary. Also, be sure to make a mental note of this spiky object, because I will talk about it again towards the end of this video. So the reason the humans want the beast to take a whiz in the first place is because if its urine lands on these orange organisms, it causes fungal-like protrusions to sprout as a result. Why do they sprout? Well, on our planet, the urine of animals can act as fertilizer. Fun fact, there have actually been attempts to harvest human urine for the purposes of farming. Apparently, getting a dousing of proper nutrients triggers this orange organism to respond. I'm assuming it's a reproductive feature, as one of the growths does contain something resembling a seed equivalent. The humans run to these growths and check them as soon as possible in a hasty manner. They don't simply take all the yellow pods to their base and check them there, despite the potential threat of nearby wildlife. And the quick cuts with each successive pop imply a sense of urgency. It seems like the reproductive reaction that may potentially occur in a viable pod is on a short timer, and if the humans wait too long, they won't be able to acquire the seed-like item they're looking for. A small humanoid creature dwells inside the pod, and the woman has to coerce it into action. She first blows on it, and then has to flick it to get it going. Oh my goodness, what a fantastic, otherworldly scene. There is no clear biological analog to life on Earth here. This is some unique, phantasmagorical stuff. This reaction would occur on its own if the humans weren't quick enough, and the resulting seed would presumably become compromised in some way if it wasn't removed immediately. I would imagine the seed would begin to grow or transform into its next stage, and at that point would become useless to the humans. The original orange lump and this little humanoid, are they different stages of the same organism? Seems unlikely, but otherwise there must be some kind of mutually beneficial relationship at play that we don't know about in order for this little humanoid to literally sacrifice itself so that another organism can reproduce. The pod does contain what appears to be an eye, however, and that's a fairly sophisticated structure that would be incredibly odd for a stationary fungal-like creature to possess, so it is possible the two are indeed the same species at different stages of life. This is by far, in my opinion, the most biologically confusing scene of the entire animation, but it's also the most striking and visually haunting. The multiple layers of yonic imagery, the haunting celestial music, seeing life wither into death before our very eyes, and then having the humans disregard all that beauty and wonder by nonchalantly plopping the seed into their little collection bucket with comedic timing. The end of this scene demonstrates that the humans have witnessed this bizarre occurrence many times before, and it no longer leaves an impact on them. We as an audience are drawn in, befuddled, and certainly immensely intrigued, but for the characters in the story, not so much. Been there, done that. There's definitely a sort of callous disregard for life present in the two human characters, and we'll see more examples of this as we keep going. The next step of the operation requires the two humans to split up. The man sits at a high vantage point, so he is able to signal to the woman in the raft when the time is right. The man decides to find one of these critters under a rock, pops the top off of it, likely killing it in the process, so he can use the top segment as a monocular. This is another example of that rather callous disregard for life that I mentioned. I would imagine they have binoculars among the equipment brought to colonize the planet, but he chose not to bring them. He can perform lookout duty without them since the raft isn't that far away. However, when a critter whose body can double up as a monocular is nearby, well, you may as well kill it to have a slightly better view. So, the goal the humans are trying to accomplish here is to get this giant, I'm gonna call it a flyfish for the sake of simplicity, to get this giant flyfish out of the water and to render it temporarily unconscious. They achieve this feat by taking the blue seed they collected, which expands in size when a certain solution is applied to it, and filling it with other seed capsules from a different plant-like organism. This combination exudes a chemical concoction into the water, which causes all these flyfish, both big and small, to flee the water source. But since they've already been exposed to the chemical solution leaking from the blue seed, they lose consciousness shortly after their attempted escape. This technique the humans use reminds me of existing fishing techniques used by indigenous peoples. For example, in the Amazon, there's a plant called barbasco. The root of this plant is pounded and ground to a pulp, and then placed in a shallow pool or stream. The toxin the root produces interferes with the respiration of the fish, which leaves them stunned. Too much exposure can kill the fish, but it's possible to have concentrations which merely leave the fish temporarily immobilized. This method has actually been incorporated into some scientific studies on fish diversity. I would not be surprised if the creators behind Scavengers were directly inspired by this indigenous fishing technique. The humans in Scavengers aren't fishing in a shallow stream, however. The water source where the fish fly dwell appears to be quite deep. This is why one of the humans needs to be on watch duty from a high vantage point to issue a signal when the giant flyfish they're trying to snag is staying near the water's surface. If the flyfish is submerged too deep when the blue capsule is tossed overboard, the flyfish may not receive sufficient exposure to the chemical to cause it to lose consciousness. If the timing isn't just right, the humans would have to acquire another blue seed and perform this process all over again. When things go according to plan, the man descends from the cliff by using a flying insect-like creature shoved into a duffel bag. While quite a cool, though dangerous concept, it's weird how he just lets go when the creature flies off. I hope he has some way to retrieve that duffel bag. Maybe they just have a ton of them back at base camp or something. Anyway, the man is there to keep the eager fauna with proboscises from interfering with the procedure the woman is about to engage in. She cuts open the flyfish and slides inside it in order to interact with its guts to make it spew some goop out of its mouth. This is another sequence of trippy visuals where the biological seems nearly technological in nature, and it's really frickin' cool. It's also another one of those moments where I had to take a step back and wonder, how did they find out how to do this? Did they hunt one of these at some point and dissect it? Did they get lucky and find a corpse on the water's edge, and then also dissect it? Obviously they had to have dissected one of them and fiddled around with the insides at some point. Regardless, acquiring this blue goop was the entire reason the humans were trying to catch the fish fly. This goop is apparently highly nutritious or something because these silly beasties can't hold themselves back from trying to feast on it. I did wonder why the humans grabbed so little of the goop when there was a bunch of it to potentially scoop up. I have to imagine the goop has a short expiration date, it doesn't last very long, and the characters have not yet found a way to preserve it in a manner where the goop retains its desired effects, and thus collecting more would be pointless. Collecting this goop in a way that does not cause lasting harm to the fish fly also allows the humans to repeat this procedure whenever necessary. I bet fish fly of this gigantic size are fairly rare, and killing the ones that live in the area would just make it harder to acquire more goop in the long run. I want to point out that this is the only step in the whole process that utilizes sophisticated human technology. The humans have a future scalpel, I guess we can call it, that is able to join split flesh back together. I think it's very possible these markings on the fish fly are actually scars from previous cuts that were made by the humans, which just goes to show that this specific individual has had its goop harvested many times before. Maybe the proboscis-having creatures are so eager because they have learned to associate the presence of humans with a free meal of goop. So, why do the humans want this goop in the first place? They want to feed the goop to this awesome, mind-boggling flying manta ray / flatworm thing. I specifically want to make a comparison between this weird, awesome flying creature and free-living flatworms of the class Turbellaria, because Turbellarians have this muscular tube they protrude from their mouth called a pharynx. This is their feeding structure. They ingest food through it. The comparison seems rather apt, does it not? The alien creature in Scavengers does have a complex digestive system though, whereas flatworms do not. Most flatworms don't even have an anus, they excrete waste through their mouth. Do keep in mind that comparing lifeforms across different planets is inherently superficial because life would have evolved with completely separate evolutionary lineages. However, this is a fictional world, obviously, so it's fun to draw analogs to real-life animals from which inspiration may have come from to create the fictional organisms. But yes, the goop is delivered to this majestic flying creature of the sky via this cute little fella, whose life unfortunately had to be sacrificed. The humans trap the leggy yellow critter so they can feed it the goop. Despite it eagerly slurping the substance up, it dies as a result shortly after. A little strange, but I mean, animals don't always know what can be poisonous for them. The goop might be so nutritionally rich that it overloads this little guy's system. Maybe those proboscis-having creatures can consume it without risk because of their larger body size, but these smaller critters can't handle it. Now what's really interesting about this little critter is that after it dies, its posterior sac inflates and loudly explodes. I think I've got a pretty good hypothesis as to why. I presume these critters are communal. They live in a heavily integrated system of burrows, so it's likely they are a highly social creature. Think of something akin to prairie dogs. If one of these critters gets snagged by a predator and dies, its sac explodes to warn all the other members of the colony that danger is nearby. The death of one individual triggers a very loud warning to everyone else to flee and find cover. The boom is also pretty intense, so I wager that it would potentially disorient a predator for a brief amount of time, further giving other members of the colony time to escape. I think a more difficult question to answer is why does the death boom cause the gigantic flying creature in the sky to decamouflage? Well, my guess there is that in order to drop its feeding apparatus and to engage in the digestive process, for whatever reason, this creature has to temporarily disable its camouflage. Maybe it can't trigger the mechanisms behind its cloaking ability when performing other bodily tasks. I also have to assume that the primary predators of these little leggy critters might also serve as potential prey for the flying manta flatworm thing up above. Or at the very least, the predator that killed the little leggy yellow critter might have to abandon the corpse lest it also get snagged by the feeding apparatus. Running away while dragging a corpse will slow you down after all, so perhaps the creatures in the sky steal the meals of other predators. There's definitely some interesting potential ecology here. I find it very fascinating. Can we talk about that camouflage though? Cause geez, it cloaks itself to be 100% invisible. There's some kind of electric spark when the process occurs, so perhaps magnetic fields are somehow involved in the camouflage mechanism? I don't know, this level of camouflage leans more toward fantasy than biology in my opinion. Why does this creature require such intense camouflage? Is there another organism that's a predator to it? Scary thought, but I personally doubt that. I think the camouflage is simply to allow this creature to predate on the ground organisms without being immediately spotted from afar. This thing is massive. You'll see it in the sky, it'll cast a huge shadow and alert everything below. Thus, it needs to stay completely out of sight until the very moment that it's ready to try and grab something below. Alright, well that was a fun bit of speculative biology, but let's now get back to talking about our human characters. Take note of how the man is resting with his eyes closed when the yellow critter is released. He only becomes alert after the flying creature reveals itself. This demonstrates that the humans usually have to kill quite a few of the yellow leggy critters before they get lucky enough to have the flying creature be overhead. The giant beasts in the sky are roaming above the landscape at random, and it seems like the humans have not yet found a way to detect them ahead of time. So it's trial and error with feeding the yellow critters goop until they get lucky and one of the flying creatures happens to be nearby. Again, that rather callous disregard for life I mentioned before. The humans are willing to sacrifice quite a bit of fauna to attain what they're looking for. And thus, we finally reach the end of this whole process. The human characters had to be near a beast urinating to collect a certain seed, they had to use the seed in order to catch a giant flyfish to collect its goop, and they had to get the sky creature to ingest this goop so that it could poop out this particular object. Everything we witnessed the humans do was for this singular, final purpose. It was all done to acquire this very special turd. This special poop, this permeable blue sphere, triggers a visceral hallucinatory experience in the brain. The humans are homesick. They miss life on their home planet. This blue sphere acts as a drug that gives them the illusion of being on planet Earth once more. It's one thing to pine for home and to imagine it in your mind, but it's another to find yourself in an ethereal simulacrum that allows you to feel, for just a few brief moments, as if you truly are home. What the humans and scavengers crave to obtain is essentially a drug trip that manifests their most cherished desires. For this person, that desire is experiencing the bustling city life back on Earth. While we don't often appreciate the small day-to-day moments in our lives, such meager and mundane events can create the strongest of nostalgia. After traveling through space for an unknown amount of time, and then being stranded on an alien planet with all communication cut off, the humans yearn to simply be part of civilization again. Everything these humans have done, all the tasks they carried out, all the life forms that have been sacrificed along the way, it was all done simply to experience a brief glimpse of home. And they repeat this process over and over because the temptation of that experience is too much to resist. That's a heavy statement about the power of nostalgia. I want to point out just one little detail about the hallucination. A child has a figurine that is of the woman character. It's possible the Vesta 1 crew are celebrities on Earth, and they had a toy line made after them. Or it could just be a byproduct of her imagination, since this is her drug trip after all. I feel either interpretation is valid. This was just a fun little detail I wanted to mention. So, do you remember how I told you to make a mental note of that spiky ball at the start of the animation? Look what we have here! That's right, the end of this whole process leads back to the very first step. It's a cycle, a feedback loop. After the blue orb is used for its hallucinogenic effects, the characters are able to repurpose this object to start their operation all over again. I think Scavengers is an absolutely magnificent animated short. It's visually stunning, it captivates your imagination, and it's crafted with so much finesse. In my opinion, one of the most brilliant decisions was to not have any dialogue whatsoever. It's a creative choice that serves multiple purposes. In a literal sense, it demonstrates that the two characters are so familiar with each other and their new life on this alien world that they are able to carry out complex tasks without the need for verbal communication. On a deeper level, it reflects the feeling of isolation and loneliness experienced by the crew. While they have each other to talk to, they are completely cut off from the rest of humanity. They are quite literally alienated from their home. Sorry, I could not resist squeezing that little pun in there. Going even further, the lack of dialogue makes the entire experience feel even more universal. Anyone should be able to relate to the general sentiment of being homesick and how far we can sometimes go to appease nostalgia. Expressing this sentiment through action rather than words leaves a far stronger impression. No dialogue also makes watching all the tasks even more bizarre and confusing. In a sense, you feel what the characters may have felt when they first crash-landed onto the planet. You're supposed to feel a bit lost. You have to observe and intuit and internalize all the strange aspects of this alien world, just as the humans have already done. And I think that's a fascinating way to tell a story. Then, in terms of story structure, the lack of dialogue allows for the sound design to set the pace for all the events we witness. There's a finely crafted tempo to the cascade of biological interactions carried out by the humans. There's a nearly mechanical flow, as if you're listening to the slow rhythm of a machine engaged in some kind of transformative process, which reinforces the motif that this alien world is biologically mechanistic in a manner that feels nearly technological. And that feeling further contributes to one of the underlying themes of utilizing the environment like a set of tools. For the two humans, planet Vesta Minor has become a biological junkyard of miscellaneous components. And in order to feed their insatiable nostalgia for home, the humans have become scavengers. And so we reach the end of this video. I hope y'all had fun listening to my thoughts, and please share your own opinions, feelings, and interpretations in the comments. Scavengers is a beautiful piece of art, and it deserves to be talked about. If you enjoy my content, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Any amount is greatly appreciated, and I could really use the help. If you'd like, you can follow me on Twitter, and also come hang out when I livestream video games over on Twitch. That will be all. See you later, Space Cowboys.